We do know that South Africa is a rich and diverse nation, but the theory of a tolerant rainbow nation is being questioned once again after this man, dressed in the traditional Ndebele attire, was being asked to leave the shopping center in Midrand. What do incidents like this do, for example, for the positive image, or to the positive image we try and portray of our tolerant rainbow nation? Brand Africa prides itself on celebrating our diversity. So let's discuss this issue further. We're joined this lunchtime by Brand Africa founder and chair, that's Thebe Ikalafeng. My brother, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Dan.
How should we interpret what we just saw taking place yesterday at that Clicks Pharmacy, the boldest shopping center in Midrand?
Well, it shows you just how far we have not come yet in terms of developing this concept of a rainbow nation at peace with itself. It's also an indictment on the education in this country, because we are the people who do not celebrate our cultures and our languages in our education. We're not encouraged to speak them. We're not encouraged to learn them. We are the people who say that our children should not speak our home languages because English is much easier. And to me, it just shows that we are a very fragile democracy, not democracy, rather a very fragile nation, which has not yet defined itself and which is not yet at peace with its diversity. I mean, our motto says unity in diversity, but we know we are a disunited nation in diversity.
Is there anything we need to read to the fact that, according to the video clip we've heard, the gentleman in the red jacket is apparently a Motswana, according to that lady who was pushing him, and the gentleman, of course, who's being asked to leave is a Ndebele man, from what we see how he's dressed. I mean, these are two Africans, and one telling the other that you are dressed inappropriately.
You know, I probably will paraphrase what Ngugi wa Thiong'o said. Ngugi said, African cultures are not on a lower rung on the ladder to a Western heaven. And unfortunately, we have elevated the Western ladder to the higher status. To us, as Africans in Africa, we tend to think that anything that is Western is of a higher status. I mean, how do you explain, to me, and it's unfortunate that it even was within Ndebele, because one of the icons of the country, Esther Mahlangu, she dresses like that every day. She travels like that. She goes through airports anywhere else in the world, and they recognize that it is who she is, and that's how she presents herself, and the embodiment of the colorfulness of our cultures.
Yeah. Now, how do you move forward? Just before I went on air, before we spoke to you, Thebe, I got a report from our newsroom saying that the owners of Boulder's shopping center have expressed regret over this, and the man in the red jacket has now been suspended pending an internal probe. But how do you move forward? Because this is just one incident. There could be many others that we haven't reported because they haven't gone viral on social media.
Indeed. To me, there's probably two things. At a fundamental level, we need to look at our education. We need to look at our education, because to us, a lot of times, the way the man was dressed, we call it formal. So what we tend to do in South Africa, for example, we always say to people, dress formal or traditional. And we try to relegate our clothes only to events or to some cultural celebration, rather than to an everyday identification of who we are. So to me, the first thing starts with education. We need to rethink and relook our education and ask ourselves an important question. Are we driving the type of education that affirms who we are? The second one is, when it comes to these corporations, is there's a need for cultural intelligence. That part of how you onboard people and train people is to train them to understand that a place like a mall, any place actually, as long as it's in this continent, this country, that we are going to get at least 11 different cultures on paper. There's multiple different subcultures even within that, and that everybody is welcome in this country, because there was nothing offensive about the man. Matter of fact, there was everything heroic about him, because a lot of us do not want to be, quote unquote, seen like that in public. But he went out and says, I'm a proud Ndebele man. So it's education and cultural intelligence that we need to drive. But most importantly, it's an acceptance of who we are. I think it's Fela Kuti once said, you must identify with Africa, then you'll have an identity. So we really need to accept who we are. And if we accept who we are able to move forward as a continent and as a people. I mean, if you look at the study that I do every year, for example, only 20% of the brands that Africans admire are made in Africa. So there's an 80% rejection of anything that comes from the continent. And when you look at that list, you'll see the Gucci's, you'll see all those Dolce & Gabbanas, but you hardly ever see somebody say, one of my favorite brands is Kente, or the Sugar, or how the Zulus dress. We don't speak like that in this continent, because we just, in this country especially, because we just don't celebrate who we are.
You know, Steve Biko spoke, and I'm paraphrasing as well, in the 70s, that the strongest weapon, or the real weapon that the colonizer had is the mind of the colonized. I mean, I know we're having a brand, image, and culture discussion here, but very briefly, your thought about that. Are we still colonized in our minds as Africans, that we value more what is not ours, what is Western, because, you know, the Western world colonized us and we're still stuck there? And how do we free ourselves from that? You've mentioned education as one, and a sense of appreciation of our culture. What else can we do?
Well, I think the one thing you write about, I love Ngugi, obviously, very much, the great Kenyan writer. And he said, if you know all the languages of the world, but you do not know your own mother language, you can replace it with culture. He says that is the highest form of enslavement. So to me, yes, we are still very much enslaved and very much colonized. You can see with our choices, you can see with what we appreciate and what we validate, because we're constantly looking for external validation. And because we're looking for external validation, the external happens to be Western rather than African. And anything African, we tend to reduce in value. So yes, we've got a long way to go, Dan. We've got a long way to go in this country, especially because we have not defined what does brand South Africa mean. What does it mean to be South African? We've got a great theory, we've got a beautiful constitution, but it's all beautiful English, but nobody's ever tried to live that and explain what does it really mean when you say in our motto, united in our diversity.
And in fact, that gentleman in the red jacket, now that you've mentioned the constitution, what he did yesterday to the man in Ndebele, Mr. Mahlangu, was actually unconstitutional, because our constitution, the Bill of Rights, celebrates the diversity, as you said, and talks about right to association, the right to be who you are. But that man's right yesterday was violated. Thank you very much, Thebe. We still have a long way to go, sadly, but there is so much that we can celebrate in our diversity. And I don't want to get going on my views about what happened yesterday, because if I start now, I won't be able to stop myself. That was Thebe Ikalafeng, chairperson of Brand Africa.